Going back into the graph, I've made sure that the displacement animation sits up higher than the forces and the setting of the new position and orientation. It just looks a little bit funny when we hit play because the character his footsteps aren't absolutely perfect. They're not tweaked as well as they could be, but they still work very well. So we now have our army kind of charging along, some faster than the others, and so I might actually go in and set the speed a little bit faster for some of the fastest particles and slower for some of the laggers. So some of them are definitely lagging behind. Again, I'd probably want to make sure that the randomization isn't too great. I'd probably be using a totally different action if the characters were moving this slowly. So let's say between 13 and 16 units. That's the random speed we're going to use, or the random velocity. Okay, so we got a fairly good-looking charge. And if we look at the characters, we get a complete change in angle as they match the terrain. So the last step of this project would be to obviously set a final render. We always want to make sure that the characters are, the masters are completely out of the picture. So I'll finally take the model, I'll just unhide the model node again, and just move the character out of the screen. And remembering that we do have full ray traced shadows on our characters, if I draw a render region, we should be able to get a fairly accurate render of what's going on. Again, I need to just jump inside of this mesh. I was looking from the outside of the mesh, from the clouds, or from the sky, and we have some pretty nice shadows going on here. So if I increase the number of particles for a final render, I'll render a sequence that's about 200 or 300 frames. So as a final bit on this, I'll jump back into the ice tree one last time. Select my point cloud, and I'll increase the number of particles to 1,000. So we have a good number of characters all working together. Cool. So that brings this tutorial to an end. Again, covering ice in quite a different context. This is very similar to what we did with the tree leaves, except the rig is obviously a lot more involved, and we're dealing with the flowing across the surface this time. So it really goes to show you just how versatile ice can be and the various areas of production that it can fit your needs. So I'll end this tutorial on this note. I might reduce the characters a little bit to get spacing a little better. I imagine if I hit play, they will probably not play nicely, so the last and final render will probably have a slight culling of these particles, and I'll do a little bit of work on the neighboring particles to space them out a little better. I could also sort of finish off by painting the ground, making sure the characters kind of grow from a certain area and not from others. So if I look in the environment and the weight map, there's the initial emission area. I could tighten that up a lot more, or I could add a few more characters along the way. If you do find that the characters are a little too thick in some areas, you can always hit Control W and lower the opacity in that area. So it will thin out the characters based on the intensity of the weight map. So you just just get a much better distribution when you can control the number of characters per area. There's actually quite a few characters in this area. We'll thin those guys out. And maybe a few around here as well. Okay, so the last part of this tutorial will involve obviously showing the final flipbook of a rendered effect. So I'll pick a camera angle and we'll render from there. So I hope you enjoyed this crowd-based tutorial series, and we'll pick this up in a ice tutorial later on down the road.